They sought to enslave humanity. Now they kneel, begging forgiveness. The massive Zephyrian warship, Dominion's Edge, hung in Earth's orbit like a steel predator, its dark hull blotting out stars. Inside the command center, Admiral Kexthul studied the blue-green planet below with cold satisfaction. His 4 arms worked the control panels with practiced efficiency, while his reptilian eyes gleamed with anticipation. Such a primitive world, he hissed to his second-in-command, Captain Vexera. Look at them down there, completely unaware of what's coming. The Zephyrians had conquered 17 star systems in the past century. Each time, the pattern was the same: arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate superior technology, and watch as the locals surrendered within days. Some species fought back briefly, but none lasted more than a week against Zephyrian might. Humans, according to their scouts, were particularly weak. They had barely reached their own moon, still used primitive chemical rockets, and spent most of their time fighting each other over trivial matters like land and resources. The perfect slaves for the growing Zephyrian empire. Begin the demonstration, Kexthul commanded. The ship's main weapon charged with a low hum that vibrated through the hull. Energy gathered in the massive cannon, bright enough to illuminate the command deck in harsh blue light. Below on Earth, millions of humans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. The beam lanced downward, striking the Sahara Desert with tremendous force. Sand turned to glass in a perfect circle 50 miles wide. The flash was visible from space stations, and within minutes, every government on Earth was scrambling to understand what had happened. Dr. Sarah Chen was in her lab at CERN when the first reports came in. As one of Earth's leading physicists, she was among the first to realize the implications of the energy readings. The amount of power required for such an attack was beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. "This isn't possible," she whispered, staring at the data streaming across her screens. "The energy signature suggests a focused antimatter beam of unprecedented scale." Her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, looked pale as he read the incoming communications. "Sarah, you need to see this. We're receiving a transmission on all frequencies simultaneously. It's not coming from Earth." The message was simple and terrifying. A holographic projection appeared in government buildings, military bases, and research facilities worldwide. The alien figure was tall and imposing, with scaled skin that shifted from deep green to black. When it spoke, its voice was translated into every human language simultaneously. "Humans of Earth, I am Admiral Kexthul of the Zephyrian Empire. You have just witnessed a fraction of our power. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your technology is laughable compared to ours. You have exactly 72 hours to surrender unconditionally, or we will reduce your cities to ash and take what survivors remain as slaves." The message repeated 3 times before cutting off, leaving humanity stunned and terrified. In the Pentagon, General Patricia Hayes slammed her fist on the conference table. "What do we know about their capabilities?" "Everything we can gather suggests they're telling the truth," replied Dr. Alan Foster, the military's chief science advisor. "The energy required for that desert strike would need our entire global power grid running for 6 months. They did it in seconds." "What about our nuclear arsenal?" "Ineffective. Our missiles can't reach orbital altitude with enough payload to matter. And even if they could, any civilization capable of interstellar travel would have defensive systems we can't imagine." President Martinez joined the emergency session via secure video link. Her face was grim but determined. "What are our options?" "Limited," General Hayes admitted. "We could try to negotiate terms of surrender that might protect some civilians or what?" Dr. Foster cleared his throat nervously. "There is one possibility, but it's extremely risky. Dr. Chen at CERN has been working on something called quantum field manipulation. It's theoretical, but if it works, it might give us a chance." Meanwhile, aboard the Dominion's Edge, Admiral Kexthul was already planning the division of human resources. The planet would be stripped of its metals and rare elements. The survivors would be sorted by physical capability, the strong would work in the mines and factories, the intelligent would serve as technicians and administrators under Zephyrian supervision. "Sir," Captain Vex Ara reported, "we're detecting increased electromagnetic activity from the planet's surface. It appears they're mobilizing their military forces." Kexthul's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. "Let them. Their primitive weapons will provide entertainment for our warriors before the real work begins." But Dr. Chen wasn't thinking about conventional weapons. In her lab, she worked frantically with a team of the world's brightest scientists who had been rushed to CERN via military transport. The quantum field project had been theoretical until now, but desperation bred innovation. "The principle is simple," she explained to the assembled team. "If we can create a localized quantum field disruption, we might be able to affect their ship's systems. Their technology, no matter how advanced, still has to obey the fundamental laws of physics." Dr. Webb frowned at the equations covering the massive whiteboards. "But we'd need to channel the entire output of the Large Hadron Collider through a focused beam. The power requirements alone are exactly what we have," Sarah interrupted. "We just need to modify every power grid on Earth to feed into a single focal point. It's never been done before, but then again, we've never faced extinction before." The next 48 hours saw the most intensive international cooperation in human history. Engineers worked around the clock to connect power grids across continents. Satellites were repositioned to create a targeting system. Military forces prepared for what many believed would be humanity's final battle. Admiral Kexthul watched these preparations with amusement. "Look at them scurrying about like insects. When this is over, I'll keep some of their leaders alive just to watch them realize how futile their efforts were." As the deadline approached, something unexpected happened. The Zephyrian sensors detected an energy buildup on Earth's surface unlike anything in their databases. It wasn't nuclear, wasn't chemical, and wasn't any form of conventional power generation they recognized. "Admiral," the ship's science officer reported with concern, "the energy readings from the planet are approaching dangerous levels. I recommend we move to a safer distance." Kexthul dismissed the warning with a wave of his hand. "Impossible. These primitives lack the knowledge to threaten us. Continue preparations for invasion." In her lab, Dr. Chen made final adjustments to the targeting system. Through her headset, she could hear countdown reports from power stations around the world. Every nuclear reactor, every hydroelectric dam, every solar array and wind turbine on Earth was about to channel its output through the modified particle accelerator beneath her feet. "T-minus 60 seconds to field activation," announced the voice of General Hayes. "Dr. Chen, are you certain this will work?" Sarah looked at the massive displays showing the Zephyrian ship hanging motionless in orbit, seemingly invincible. "No, General, but it's the only chance we have." The countdown reached 0. Every light on Earth flickered as unimaginable amounts of energy flowed through the grid towards CERN. The particle accelerator, modified beyond all recognition, began to glow with an otherworldly light. Reality itself seemed to bend around the focusing array as quantum fields collapsed and reformed in patterns that had never existed in nature. The beam that erupted from Earth was invisible to the naked eye, but unmistakable on every sensor within 1,000 light-years. It struck the Dominion's edge not with destructive force, but with something far more devastating. It severed the ship's connection to the quantum fields that powered their technology. Admiral Kexthul felt his ship die around him. Artificial gravity failed, life support systems shut down, and the massive engines went silent. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows as backup systems struggled to maintain basic functions. "Report!" he roared, his forearms scrambling to maintain balance in the zero gravity. "All primary systems offline, sir. The quantum field generators are completely dead. We're running on chemical batteries with maybe 6 hours of life support remaining." For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kex Thule felt fear. The humans had done something impossible. They had found a way to neutralize technology that was thousands of years more advanced than their own. On Earth, celebration was brief. Dr. Chen knew they had only bought themselves time. "The effect will wear off," she announced to the Emergency Council. "Their systems will reboot eventually. We need to use this window to show them that humanity isn't as helpless as they thought." What happened next would be remembered in both human and Zephyrian history as the moment everything changed. Instead of pressing their momentary advantage with violence, humanity chose a different path. President Martinez addressed not just her own people, but transmitted directly to the disabled Zephyrian ship. "Admiral Kex Thule, you came here believing we were primitive and helpless. You've learned otherwise. But we don't want to be your enemies. We want to show you what humanity truly represents, not through conquest, but through compassion." Within hours, human spacecraft launched toward the crippled alien vessel. Not warships, but rescue craft loaded with oxygen, food, and medical supplies. The same species the Zephyrians had come to enslave was now working desperately to keep them alive. Aboard the Dominion's Edge, Captain Vexara watched in bewilderment as human engineers worked alongside Zephyrian technicians to restore life support. "I don't understand, Admiral. They could let us die. Why are they helping us?" Admiral Kex Thule had no answer. In all his campaigns across 17 star systems, he had never encountered anything like this. The humans had demonstrated they could defend themselves, but instead of seeking revenge, they were offering aid. As the first Zephyrian systems came back online, a human engineer named Tom Rodriguez worked side by side with a Zephyrian technician called Mordal. Despite the language barrier, they found ways to communicate through gestures and shared technical knowledge. "Your quantum field disruptor," Mordal managed in broken English, "it should not be possible with your technology level." Tom grinned. "That's what makes us human. We don't accept impossible as an answer." The repairs took 3 days. During that time, something unprecedented happened in the history of the Zephyrian Empire. For the first time, their warriors worked alongside their intended victims, not as masters and slaves, but as equals facing a common challenge. Admiral Kex Thule found himself in the strange position of owing his life to the very people he had come to conquer. As he stood on his restored bridge, looking down at the blue world that had humbled his mighty fleet, he began to understand that the Zephyrian Empire had encountered something it had never faced before, a species that fought not just with weapons, but with ideals that could change hearts and minds. The first phase of what would become known as the Great Turning had begun. They sought to enslave humanity. Now they kneel, begging forgiveness. Admiral Kex Thule stood in what had once been the most feared command center in the galaxy, but now felt more like a prison of his own making. The Dominion's Edge floated in Earth's orbit, fully operational again thanks to human assistance, yet he found himself unable to give the order to resume the invasion. 3 days of working alongside humans had shattered everything he thought he knew about conquest and strength. His warriors, the most elite forces in the Zephyrian Empire, were asking questions that had never been asked before, questions that challenged the very foundation of their civilization. "Admiral," Captain Vexara approached cautiously, "the Imperium is demanding a status report. High Command wants to know why we haven't completed the subjugation of Earth." Kex Thule's 4 hands moved restlessly over his command console. How could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he tell the Imperium that their most successful invasion force had been not just defeated, but completely transformed by a species they had dismissed as primitive insects? "Tell them we're conducting extended reconnaissance," he replied finally. "I need more time to understand what we're dealing with here." Down on Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen was facing her own crisis of understanding. The quantum field disruptor had worked beyond her wildest expectations, but the real mystery was what happened afterward. Governments around the world were demanding that she find a way to replicate the effect permanently, to turn it into a weapon that could protect Earth from future threats. "You don't understand," she argued during yet another emergency council meeting. "The field disruption was a one-time event. The energy requirements nearly brought down our entire power grid. We can't just press a button and do it again." General Hayes leaned forward. "Then what's stopping them from calling in reinforcements? Their fleet could return with 100 ships, 1,000 ships. We got lucky once, Dr. Chen. We may not get lucky again." But Sarah was thinking about something else entirely. During the repair efforts, she had worked directly with Zephyrian scientists. What she had learned changed everything she thought she knew about interstellar civilization. The Zephyrians weren't evil monsters bent on destruction. They were products of a system that had grown so large and so powerful that it had forgotten what it meant to have equals rather than subjects. For 1,000 years, they had encountered only species that were either too primitive to resist or too weak to matter. "We need to invite their leaders down to Earth," Sarah proposed. "Not for negotiations or surrender talks, but to show them something they've never seen before." President Martinez looked skeptical. "And what exactly would that be?" "Choice," Sarah replied simply. "Real choice, freely made." The invitation that went out to Admiral Kex Thule was unlike any communication in the history of galactic diplomacy. Instead of demands or threats, it was a simple request. Come down to Earth not as a conqueror, but as a guest. See what humanity had built not through conquest, but through cooperation. Kex Thule's advisors were unanimous in their opposition. "It's obviously a trap, Admiral," insisted his security chief, Commander Zar-X. "They'll attempt to capture or assassinate you the moment you set foot on their world." But the Admiral found himself curious in a way he had never experienced before. "Prepare a shuttle," he ordered. "I'm going down." The landing site was Central Park in New York City, chosen specifically for its symbolism. As Kex Thule's shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, he saw something that confounded every assumption about primitive species. Massive cities that stretched to the horizon, but with green spaces woven throughout like a tapestry. Architecture that reached toward the sky while leaving room for life to flourish. The reception committee was led by Dr. Chen, but it wasn't the military parade he expected. Instead, families had gathered with their children, scientists stood alongside artists and teachers, and the crowd was singing something the translation software identified as a welcome song. "This is your military leadership?" Kexathol asked as he stepped from his shuttle, his massive form towering over the humans, but somehow not feeling threatening in this context. "In a way," Dr. Chen replied with a smile, "but we believe our greatest strength has never been our weapons. It's our ability to include rather than conquer." The tour of Earth that followed over the next week would become legendary in both human and Zephyrian records. Kex Thule visited hospitals where doctors worked tirelessly to heal, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to care. He saw schools where children learned not just facts and skills, but how to think for themselves and question everything, even authority. In Geneva, he observed the United Nations in session, watching representatives from nearly 200 different human tribes work through their differences with words rather than weapons. The concept of voluntary cooperation between independent groups was so foreign to Zephyrian experience that he required multiple explanations. "But who commands them?" he asked Dr. Chen as they watched a particularly heated debate about climate policy. "How do you maintain order without absolute authority?" "We don't," Sarah admitted. "Sometimes we argue for years about the right course of action. Sometimes we make mistakes. But the decisions we reach are ours, made freely, and we're more likely to follow them because we participated in making them." The most profound moment came when Kexthul visited a small farming community in Kenya. The village elder, an ancient woman named Amara, sat with the towering alien admiral under a great baobab tree and shared tea while children played nearby. "Your ships are very impressive," she said through a translator. "But tell me, Admiral, when was the last time you chose to do something simply because it brought you joy?" Kexthul's four arms gestured helplessly. In Zephyrian culture, everything was duty, hierarchy, and efficiency. Personal satisfaction was achieved through successful conquest and advancement in rank. The concept of joy as a motivation for action was literally incomprehensible. "I don't understand the question," he admitted. Amara smiled and pointed to the children. "Watch them play. No one ordered them to run and laugh. No one commanded them to create games. They do it because it feels good to be alive and free. That is joy, Admiral. That is what makes life worth living." That night, alone in the quarters humanity had provided for him, Admiral Kexthul composed a message to the Zephyrian Imperium that would change the course of galactic history. "High Command, this is Admiral Kexthul reporting from Earth. I must advise immediate suspension of all conquest operations pending full review of our contact with humanity. These beings possess capabilities that our current tactical assessments have failed to account for." The response came within hours, delivered by High Admiral Thexvor himself aboard the massive dreadnought Imperial Fist. The ship that emerged from hyperspace above Earth made the Dominion's Edge look like a toy. It carried enough firepower to reduce continents to rubble and a crew of 50,000 of the Empire's most fanatical warriors. "Admiral Kexthul," the communication crackled across space. "You will resume conquest operations immediately or be relieved of command and executed for treason. The Empire does not negotiate with primitives." On Earth, emergency sessions convened as sensors detected the massive new threat. Military leaders demanded immediate activation of the quantum disruptor, but Dr. Chen shook her head. "The field won't work on a ship that size," she explained. "And even if it did, we barely survived the power drain last time. A second attempt would destroy our entire electrical infrastructure." President Martinez looked grim. "Admiral Kexthul, you know your people better than we do. What are we facing?" Kexthul's expression was troubled as he studied the sensor readings of his former superior's ship. "High Admiral Thexvor is Old Guard Empire. He believes absolutely in Zephyrian supremacy and the divine right of conquest. He will not listen to reason, and he will not show mercy." "Then we fight," General Hayes declared. "We've proven we can defend ourselves once." "No," Kexthul interrupted, and his tone carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across the galaxy. "You cannot fight the Imperial Fist with conventional weapons or even your field disruptor. But there is another way." He turned to face the assembled human leaders, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, his posture was that of an equal speaking to equals rather than a superior addressing subordinates. "Let me return to my ship and speak with my crew. What I have learned here, what you have shown me about strength that comes from choice rather than fear, it needs to be shared. Not just with High Admiral Thexvor, but with every Zephyrian who has spent their life believing that might makes right." Dr. Chen understood immediately. "You want to turn your own ship against the Empire." "I want to give my people what you've given me," Kexthul replied. "The chance to choose what kind of beings they want to be." The next day, as the Imperial Fist moved into attack position above Earth, The Dominion's edge did something that had never happened in the history of the Zephyrian Empire. Instead of falling in line with the flagship, it moved to position itself between the dreadnought and the planet below. "Admiral Kex Thul," High Admiral Thexivor's voice thundered across the comm channels. "Stand down immediately and assume supporting position for planetary bombardment." The response that came back was heard not just on the command ship, but broadcast on all frequencies, so every Zephyrian in the fleet could hear it. "High Admiral, this is Admiral Kex Thul. I cannot comply with orders to destroy these people. They have shown us something we have never seen before. A civilization built on cooperation rather than conquest, strength through unity rather than dominance. I formally request that you join me in opening diplomatic relations with humanity." The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds. Then High Admiral Thexivor's rage exploded across space. "You dare defy the Empire? You dare betray your own kind for these miserable primitives? All weapons target the Dominion's edge. Admiral Kex Thul, you have chosen to die with your new pets." But something unexpected happened as the Imperial Fist charged its weapons. Other ships in the Zephyrian fleet began moving out of formation. Not all of them, perhaps half, remained loyal to High Admiral Thexvor, but enough to turn what should have been an execution into a civil war among the stars. Captain Vexara, commanding one of the vessels that had moved to support Kex Thul, explained her decision in terms that would be studied by historians for generations. "I have worked alongside humans for the past week. I have seen what they are capable of when they choose to cooperate rather than compete. I have seen warriors lay down their weapons to build rather than destroy. If this is what the High Admiral calls weakness, then I choose to be weak." The battle that erupted above Earth was unlike any conflict in recorded history. It was not fought over territory or resources, but over the fundamental question of what civilization should represent. On one side were those who believed in the ancient ways of conquest and dominance. On the other were those who had glimpsed a different possibility, a galaxy where different species could coexist as equals. Down on Earth, humanity watched helplessly as their fate was decided in space. But they were not passive observers. Dr. Chen worked frantically with Zephyrian engineers who had remained on the planet, developing new ways to support their newfound allies. The quantum field technology that had started as a weapon was transformed into a communication system that allowed the rebels to coordinate their efforts despite Imperial jamming. The tide of battle turned when Admiral Kex Thul made a decision that violated every principle of Zephyrian military doctrine. Instead of targeting the Imperial Fist's weapons or engines, he aimed for the ship's communication array and broadcast a single message across the entire fleet. It was not a message of defiance or anger. It was a simple recording of children playing in that Kenyan village, of Dr. Chen working alongside Zephyrian scientists, of the moment when an elderly woman named Amara had asked a question that changed everything. "When was the last time you chose to do something simply because it brought you joy?" The message propagated through the fleet's communication network faster than High Admiral Thexvor could stop it. And as it spread, something remarkable happened. Ships began standing down, weapons powered offline. Across the Zephyrian fleet, warriors who had spent their lives following orders without question began asking questions of their own. The Civil War ended not with a grand battle, but with the sight of the mighty dreadnought, Imperial Fist. Alone in space, its weapons still charged, but with no targets left to fire upon. High Admiral Thexivor found himself commanding a ship whose crew was quietly but firmly refusing to carry out orders to bombard Earth. The second phase of the Great Turning had begun, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. They sought to enslave humanity. Now they kneel, begging forgiveness. High Admiral Thexivor stood alone on the bridge of the Imperial Fist, watching his empire crumble around him. Through the massive viewports, he could see Zephyrian warships that had served the Empire for centuries, now flying in formation with human vessels. His own crew, warriors he had trained personally, looked at him with expressions he had never seen before. Not fear or hatred, but something worse: disappointment. "Sir," his communications officer reported quietly, "we're receiving requests for surrender terms from 17 star systems. The rebellion is spreading faster than our reinforcements can contain it." Thexvor's scaled fists clenched as he watched Admiral Kexthul's ship escort a human delegation toward the Imperial Fist. The sight filled him with rage that burned like acid in his chest. Everything the Zephyrian Empire had built over 1,000 years was being torn apart by primitives who hadn't even mastered faster-than-light travel. "They're requesting permission to come aboard, sir," the communications officer continued. "The humans want to talk." "Talk?" Thexvor spat. "There is nothing to discuss with inferiors. Ready the suicide protocol. If the Empire must fall, we'll take these humans with us." But when he reached for the control that would overload the ship's reactor, his hand found nothing. During the night, while he had raged and plotted, his own security chief had quietly disabled the self-destruct mechanism. "Commander Morthek," Thexavor growled, "explain yourself." The grizzled old warrior met his superior's gaze without flinching. "Sir, I've served under your command for 30 years. I've followed your orders across 17 campaigns. But I've also spent the last week listening to the communications from Earth, and I've heard what our people found down there." "Weakness," Thexvor snapped. "They found weakness and called it strength. No, sir. They found something we've never had. They found hope." Before Thexvor could respond, the docking bay announced the arrival of the human delegation. He watched on the security monitors as the impossible procession made its way through his ship. At the front walked Admiral Kexthul, but beside him was Dr. Sarah Chen and a small group of humans who should have been cowering in terror. Instead, they moved with quiet confidence, stopping to speak with Zephyrian crew members who gathered along the corridors. The most shocking sight was seeing his own warriors, elite soldiers who had conquered star systems, listening intently as the humans spoke about concepts like choice, cooperation, and the possibility of peace between species. When the delegation reached the command bridge, High Admiral Thexvor was waiting in full ceremonial armor, surrounded by his most loyal officers. But even among these faithful few, he could see uncertainty in their eyes. "So," he said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command, "the primitives have come to dictate terms to their superiors." Dr. Chen stepped forward, and Thexvor was struck by the fact that she showed no fear. In all his years of conquest, he had never met a being from an inferior species who did not cower before Zephyrian might. "High Admiral," she said simply, "we've come to offer you a choice." Thexvor's laugh was harsh and grating. "You offer me choice? I am the Supreme Commander of the Zephyrian Empire. I take what I want and destroy what opposes me. What choice could primitives like you possibly offer to one such as me?" "The choice to be more than you are," Sarah replied. "The choice to lead your people to something greater than conquest." For the next hour, something unprecedented in galactic history took place on the bridge of the Imperial Fist. Instead of surrender negotiations or demands for capitulation, the humans simply told their story. They spoke of a species that had once been as warlike and divided as any in the galaxy, but had learned to find strength in diversity and unity in common purpose. Dr. Chen showed holographic displays of human achievements, not weapons or conquests, but art and music, scientific discoveries that benefited all of humanity, and acts of courage that involved saving lives rather than taking them. "This is what we could build together," she explained. "Not an empire based on fear and domination, but a community of worlds where different species contribute their unique strengths to solve problems none of us could handle alone. High Admiral Thexvor listened in growing frustration and confusion. Everything the humans described went against fundamental principles of Zephyrian civilization. Cooperation with inferiors was unthinkable. Voluntary association was inefficient. Peace was simply the absence of war, not a goal worth pursuing. But as he looked around his bridge, he saw something that chilled him to his core. His officers were listening. Not just listening, but considering what the humans were saying. Some were even nodding in agreement. "You speak of cooperation," he said finally, "but you know nothing of the galaxy. There are species out there that would destroy you without hesitation if given the chance. The Nexari Hive, the Void Stalkers, the machine consciousness of Xerion Prime. They understand only strength and dominance. Your naive idealism would be the death of every world you claim to protect." Admiral Kexthul stepped forward at this point, and when he spoke it was with the voice of someone who had been transformed by new understanding. "You're right, High Admiral. There are terrible threats in the galaxy. But consider this. For 1,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire has fought these threats alone. We've won battles, but never achieved lasting victory because we've never tried to understand our enemies or find ways to address the root causes of conflict." He gestured to the humans. "In 1 week, these people showed us cooperation so effective that it turned our own fleet against us. Not through trickery or superior weapons, but through ideas so powerful that they changed how we see ourselves and our purpose. Imagine," Kexthul continued, "if instead of conquering 17 star systems, we had offered them partnership. Instead of slaves, we would have allies. Instead of subjugated worlds providing tribute, we would have willing partners contributing to our common defense." The argument that followed revealed the depth of the transformation taking place. High Admiral Thexvor represented the old way, 1,000 years of tradition that had brought the Zephyrian Empire to dominance over a significant portion of the galaxy. But his own officers, warriors he had trained and trusted, were beginning to question whether dominance was the same thing as security. The turning point came when Dr. Chen addressed a concern that had been growing in Thexvor's mind. "You're wondering what happens to you," she said gently. "In our system, when leaders make mistakes, they're held accountable. But accountability doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it means the opportunity to make things right." She showed him records from Earth's history. Leaders who had made terrible decisions but had later worked to repair the damage they had caused. Stories of redemption and transformation that proved even those who had done great harm could choose to become forces for good. "The Zephyrian Empire has conquered 17 star systems," Sarah continued. "But you could be the leader who helps them become free partners in a galactic community. You could be remembered not as the last High Admiral of a dying empire, but as the first architect of something greater." The silence on the bridge stretched for long minutes as Thexvor considered what he was hearing. Around him, his officers waited for his decision, but he could see in their faces that they had already made theirs. Finally, the old High Admiral did something that had never happened in recorded Zephyrian history. He removed his ceremonial armor and set it aside, standing before the humans not as a conqueror, but as someone seeking guidance. "If I were to consider this path," he said slowly, "what would you require of me?" The answer surprised him with its simplicity. The humans didn't want tribute or submission. They wanted him to return to the 17 conquered star systems and offer their inhabitants a choice. Remain part of a reformed Zephyrian republic as equal partners, or gain full independence with guarantees of protection against future threats. Over the following months, the transformation of Zephyrian civilization became a galactic phenomenon. The process was not easy or quick, Many worlds initially rejected Zephyrian offers of partnership, remembering too well the brutality of conquest. Some Zephyrian factions refused to accept the new order and had to be dealt with through force. But gradually, something remarkable emerged. The Kepler Mining Consortium, formerly enslaved miners from 3-star systems, became willing partners when offered fair compensation and modern safety equipment. The academic collective of Rigel 7, their scholars previously forced to work on weapons development, joined enthusiastically when invited to participate in pure research. Most dramatically, the warrior clans of Vega 9, who had been the Empire's most bitter enemies, became its strongest allies when offered the chance to redirect their martial skills toward defending rather than conquering. Dr. Mai Sarah Chen found herself appointed as the first human ambassador to the new Zephyrian Republic, working from a space station that orbited the former imperial capital. The irony wasn't lost on her. Humanity had gone from being a target of conquest to being a senior partner in galactic civilization in less than a year. The most meaningful moment came during the formal ceremony establishing the new government. Instead of a coronation or installation of absolute rulers, it was a simple signing ceremony where representatives from dozens of worlds agreed to work together for their common benefit. High Admiral Thexvor, now calling himself Coordinator Thexvor, stood before the assembled delegates and did something that would have been unthinkable under the old empire. He apologized. "For 1,000 years," he said, his voice carrying to every world in the Republic through quantum communication networks, "the Zephyrian Empire caused suffering across the galaxy. We told ourselves it was necessary, that it brought order and security. We were wrong." He paused, looking directly at representatives from worlds his forces had conquered. "I cannot undo the harm that was done. I cannot bring back those who died resisting our rule, or restore the cultures we suppressed, or heal the wounds we inflicted. But I can promise you this: the Zephyrian Republic will be dedicated to ensuring such harm never happens again." Then, in a gesture that sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy, the former High Admiral of the most powerful empire in known space knelt before the assembled representatives. "I beg your forgiveness, not because I deserve it, but because your forgiveness will allow us to build something better than what came before." One by one, the delegates approached the kneeling Zephyrian leader. Some offered formal forgiveness. Others simply acknowledged his words. A few walked past without acknowledgement, their wounds still too fresh for reconciliation. But when Amara, the elderly woman from Kenya who had first asked about Joy, stepped forward and placed her weathered hand on Thexavor's scaled head in blessing, there wasn't a dry eye among the humans present. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn," she said softly. "It's something you choose to give when you're ready to help someone become better than they were." The ceremony concluded with the reading of the Republic Charter, a document that began with words no galactic government had ever used before. "We, the beings of diverse worlds and species, choose to unite not in conquest, but in cooperation, seeking not dominion, but partnership, building not an empire, but a community." As the delegates dispersed to carry word of the new order back to their worlds, Dr. Chen stood on the observation deck watching ships from dozens of different species working together to construct new space stations and research facilities. Admiral Kexathul joined her, now wearing the simple uniform of the Republic Defense Force, rather than the elaborate regalia of an imperial officer. "Do you think it will work?" he asked. "This dream of cooperation across the galaxy?" Sarah smiled, remembering a conversation from months earlier. "A few days ago, a Zephyrian warrior asked me, when was the last time I chose to do something simply because it brought me joy? Today, I watched former enemies choose to forgive and build something new together. If that's not joy, I don't know what is." In the months and years that followed, the transformation continued to spread. The Nexari hive, faced with offers of trade rather than threats of conquest, gradually opened diplomatic relations. The machine consciousness of Xerion Prime offered access to organic research in exchange for technological cooperation, became unexpected allies in solving energy crises across the galaxy. Even the Void Stalkers, the most feared predators in known space, eventually agreed to negotiate when presented with alternatives to constant warfare. The galaxy didn't become perfect overnight. There were still conflicts, still species that chose isolation or aggression, still problems that seemed impossible to solve. But for the first time in recorded history, there was hope that different species could work together to face whatever challenges the universe might offer. And at the center of it all, the small blue world called Earth continued to orbit its yellow star, its people proud of what they had accomplished not through conquest or domination, but through the simple revolutionary act of treating other beings as equals, deserving of respect and cooperation. The species that had once been dismissed as primitive slaves had shown the galaxy what true strength looked like: the power to transform enemies into friends, fear into hope, and the endless cycle of conquest into the beginning of genuine peace. They had sought to enslave humanity, but instead learned what it meant to be free.